Happy Tuesday, everybody! In honor of Dr. Seuss Week at my children's preschool, I am dressing the part. So, thing one and thing two probably represent both sides of my personality, maybe. But anyway, we are so excited to be here with Miss Lisa, who's going to talk to us about solving the mystery of medical necessity, which is a huge and popular topic that we get so many questions about. And we know that I like to go to the experts to get the answers to the questions that you have. In case you don't recognize Lisa, she's been involved in medical billing management and consulting since 1982. She has an unreal billing company that is works with multidisciplinary practices, chiropractic, incredible experience, but the story behind how she started the company is just phenomenal. I'm not going to get into all that. It's just one of the million things that I love about her and what she does with the state of Texas. And for people working in the state of Texas, she's a pretty phenomenal lady. But she founded Gold Star Medical, which is an award-winning company that provides remote billing services for physicians to small, medium-sized, and group practices. Prior to opening Gold Star Medical, she worked for one of the largest practice management consulting firms in the country. To say that she has worked with a lot of doctors is an understatement of a lifetime. Really, like I said, she's one of my favorite go-to consultants for questions when I have one of those moments like, I think I know the answer, but I don't really know. And I'm never going to answer a question that I don't know for sure. So you have to go to the experts. And that's why Ms. Lisa is here. So Lisa, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Christy. And I love your headset. I think it's beautiful. All you need now is like the little tube that you can, drink out of and stuff. It'd be just perfect.
Next week's my birthday on the webinar series. Y'all never know what I'm going to be wearing.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Hey, Christy, how much time do we have on this? Is about 45 minutes to now?
45, 50 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so welcome everybody to our webinar today, hosted by ChiroHealthUSA, one of my favorite organizations to work with in the chiropractic industry, bar none. And so I love it when they come and when they invite me to come and speak for them and help them out with their webinar series. And so, as Christy said, my name's Lisa Maciejewski. She didn't pronounce my last name because she still hasn't figured it out yet. But it's pronounced Maciejewski, and I am the owner and president of Gold Star Medical Business Services. We've been in operation as a company since 2006. Started out the company to give my husband, who was disabled, basically a job to work from home. And over time, it began to grow and flourish. In 2009, my husband passed away. And so when he did, I left my consulting job with the practice management firm that I was working for and took over full-time management of Gold Star Medical. And since then, we have expanded the company to include, we started out doing chiropractic billing, and now we do chiropractic multi-specialty practices and other medical specialties as well. And so we can essentially do billing for just about any small to middle-sized practice in the United States. We have over 75 offices that we do billing for of a variety of medical specialties. And we also do billing consulting and staff training as well. So if you have a billing department that just needs a little bit of extra help with staff training, billing and coding, denial management, we're there to help as well. So this is my contact information. It will be up again at the end of the presentation in case you feel like you have additional questions and you want to call me. But today's topic is a really, really important one for chiropractors and obviously for medical doctors as well. But I think chiropractors in general really struggle with this whole concept of medical necessity and what is considered to be medical necessity from the insurance company standpoint. And I know, because I've been in the chiropractic field for so many years, that sometimes our definition, meaning the chiropractic industry's definition of medical necessity, is very different than the insurance companies. But the problem with that is that we are bound, if we are filing claims to an insurance company, and we are in network with that insurance company, then we are bound by our contract to color between the lines and to understand what that payer's definition is of medical necessity. And in many cases, when I speak to doctors of chiropractic and office managers of chiropractors, they don't even know where to start in helping to define and establish what medical necessity is for their practice and for the patients that they serve. So, these are the age-old questions that I get from chiropractors all the time when I'm talking to them. They'll say, well, how do I know how many visits I can bill to Medicare? I heard that there was a 12-visit limit, or I just billed 12 visits and then I cut them off to maintenance. Or, how many visits can I bill to a commercial payer, to Blue Cross? I heard that Blue Cross only pays for so many exams or so many re-exams. And there's all of this mystery behind it. And I hear a lot of, well, my buddy told me that I could do this, and this is the way they do it, and this is the way they bill it. And that's all fine and good. But the bottom line is you have to know what the payers are saying so that if you were ever to be audited, or if the claims that you're submitting come into question, you're able to go back to the payer's guideline, not what your buddy said, but what the payers are saying, to help you argue that claim or appeal that claim. So another question that I get a lot is how do I know when a patient is going from active care to maintenance care? That's another big question that I get from the chiropractors. And then the other is, well, what do you mean by medical necessity? I don't even know what that means, because what I feel is medically necessary and what a payer feels is medically necessary are sometimes two different things. So you have to understand that medical necessity it drives all claims payments and all claims processing. So I don't know if any of you are listening in. Maybe you're not a chiropractor, maybe you're a staff member and you verified benefits. And when you verify benefits on a patient, you will ask, are chiropractic services covered? And sometimes they'll ask you, well, what's the diagnosis? And you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't know yet because we haven't diagnosed the patient, but why are they even asking that question? Is because if you gave them a diagnosis, for example of autism, they might say that no, chiropractic services are not covered because spinal manipulation is not, even though we know that autistic patients who receive spinal manipulation will become will get better, or will start to feel better, or start to become more social, or be more outgoing. That's not proven to be a medically necessary indication for spinal manipulation. So, and sometimes when you're verifying benefits, you may be asked a question such as, you ask them, is this code covered? Is physical therapy covered? Well, what is the diagnosis? Or they may say, yes, based on medical necessity. And so what medical necessity equates to in insurance speak is diagnosis. So for the most part. And so the definition of medical necessity is determined by the payer, not the provider. And the payers will provide us with guidance on medical necessity in the form of medical necessity guideline documents. In Medicare, these are called LCDs or LCAs or NCDs, standing for local coverage determination, local coverage articles, and national coverage determination documents. The commercial payers call these medical policies or medical guidelines, and then the commercial payers, in addition, may have reimbursement policies to accompany those medical policies. And it's those medical policies that are going to help us define medical necessity in any medical specialty, whether it be chiropractic, physical therapy, injection coding, whatever it is you're doing in your office. And so according to Medicare, their definition of medical necessity is defined as healthcare services or supplies needed to prevent, diagnose, or treat an illness, injury, condition, disease, or its symptoms and that meet accepted standards of Medicare. Well, what are those standards? Again, that goes back to the LCD, or the local coverage determination document. It says Medicare covers services that it views as medically necessary to diagnose or treat your health condition. And this I copied and pasted directly from Medicare.gov. And this is what Medicare tells patients is what medical necessity is considered. Services must also meet criteria supplied by national coverage determination and local coverage determinations. These are decided by the federal government and private Medicare contractors, or what we know as Medicare administrative contractors, to determine whether or not Medicare will pay for a specific item or service. And that definition of medical necessity is pretty much the same definition of medical necessity that most commercial payers have adopted as well. Determinations of medical necessity, according to the American College of Medical Quality, must adhere to the standard of care that applies to the actual direct care and treatment of the patient. It is the standard terminology that all healthcare professionals and entities will use in the review process when determining if medical care is appropriate and essential. And so now that we have defined medical necessity, let's talk about, first of all, medical necessity in Medicare. Now, there may be some of you that are listening in that do very little Medicare billing for your patients. I've heard some DCs say, well, we don't take Medicare, and hopefully if that is the case, then what you're doing is you're referring your Medicare patients out of the practice, and you're not just treating them as a cash patient without a Medicare number, because chiropractors are not eligible to opt out of Medicare. But Medicare is a standard that there's an old saying in the insurance industry, as Medicare goes, so does the rest of the insurance industry. And so the insurance industry in general looks to Medicare as the gold standard for the medical policies and the guidelines. Many of the commercial payers will adopt those Medicare standards, and then some of them will interpret those standards and have latitude to either make their medical necessity standards more or less stringent, or less or more broad in the scope of treatment that can be performed. As we know, for Medicare, the only thing that is covered are spinal manipulations. Well, we know that other commercial payers, if they were to adopt just the Medicare standard of medical necessity, they wouldn't cover anything except spinal manipulation. And we know that that's not the case. We know that commercial payers will cover therapies and exams and x-rays and other services that Medicare, at least at this point in time in our history, will not cover. But it all starts with Medicare. So Medicare is what the federal government and the laws that define billing compliance and medical compliance and medical necessity start with the federal government and with Medicare. So we're going to talk about medical necessity for chiropractic services as it relates to Medicare. So the Medicare standard is again one that we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of, and what the Medicare standard does for us is it helps define some criteria for how to, for example, how to distinguish between active treatment of chronic conditions, and maintenance care, and know when to draw that line. So if you have that question about, well, what is considered maintenance and what is considered active care, the Medicare standard has that. Medicare standards also provide us a template for how to document initial and subsequent visits. And Medicare has a ton of aids that chiropractors can use to help them with their documentation, including a checklist called a Medicare job aid. And I'm going to show you an example of that here later on in the presentation. So even if you don't bill much Medicare, the Medicare standard can really help you hone in on this concept of medical necessity and what it means for your practice. So the Medicare standards are written in the form of national and local coverage determination documents and articles. We call them NCDs or LCDs. So if I say the word LCD from now on, I'm not going to say local coverage determination documents. I'm just going to call it an LCD for a local coverage determination and an LCA for local coverage article. Now, Medicare over the last couple of years has done a pretty good job of taking the LCDs as they were written several years ago, included a whole mishmash of information about medical necessity, about documentation requirements, coding requirements, billing requirements. And what they've done over the last couple of years is split the LCDs out to where the LCDs cover the medical policies that define medical necessity and utilization parameters, and then the LCAs give us the coding and the billing guidance. And so, and you'll see as I show you some of the examples of the LCDs, it even tells you that billing and coding information has been removed from that LCD. So you have to look in a couple of different places in order to get the big picture. Medicare also has additional publications that can be used for billing, coding, and documentation guidance for chiropractors that I will show you. They actually give us a wealth of resource in order for us to be able to do things in a compliant way and to bill compliantly and to treat patients compliantly and according to the guidelines for medical necessity. So in 2019 and 2020, as I said, Medicare began removing all billing and coding guidance from the LCDs. Some Medicare contractors have removed the LCDs altogether. Now that poses a little bit of a problem for us because you have to understand that throughout the United States, every state is tied to a MAC or a Medicare Administrative Contractor, and you have to file claims to that contractor based on the state that you live in. Now, I live in Texas, and so we have a lot of clients in Texas and Arkansas, Mississippi, Colorado, New Mexico, and so that particular Medicare Administrative Contractor is Novitas Solutions. If you're out in California, you may be filing your claims to Noridian. Well, if you're in California or Arizona and you're filing claims to Noridian and you can't find your LCD because they've removed it altogether, then what do you do? And we'll discuss what your options are here as we move along throughout the presentation. So it is very important, if at all possible, for you to find the most current LCD and LCA of the contractor to whom you file Medicare claims. So I'm just going to show you some examples with screenshots of how to look up an LCD. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to your Medicare contractor. And again, since I'm in Texas, we're going to use Novitas Solutions as the contractor. And you can see that Novitas Solutions has two jurisdictions for Medicare Part B. Jurisdiction L, which handles Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and then you have and parts of Virginia, certain parts of Virginia, and then you have jurisdiction H, which covers Texas, New Mexico, not Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And so if you're in those states, this is where you would look up your LCD or your LCCA. You need to not only look up the correct payer, but the correct jurisdiction as well. From there, once you click on the correct jurisdiction, then this is the home page, and you'll notice that there are two links. One is the main medical policy LCD link, and then you have a main link in the quick links called LCD and policy search. And so you can use either one of those links to find the LCD that you're looking for. So let's say we're looking for the LCD for chiropractic. What you would do is once you click on the LCD link, you would, in your search box, type in your keyword. Sometimes you can type in the CPT code 98941 and find it. But remember, it does tell us that not every CPT code has an LCD. And what it tells you to do is, if you don't find what you're looking for, you would browse the active policy index or retired policy index, or do a standard web search in the top corner. And every Medicare administrative contractor is going to give you an option to do an alternative type of a search for the LCD if they do not have one published that is active for their Medicare administrative contractor. So you may have to dig around a little bit to find one that is relevant to your particular contractor, but most of the payers still do have LCDs and LCAs available. So what happens is, when you type in chiropractic, it gives you 2 links. It gives you a link for billing and coding for chiropractic services, and you'll notice that the article ID starts with the letter A. That means it's a local coverage article, and any article that starts with the letter L is an LCD. And so the chiropractic search brought up 3 different local coverage determination documents and articles, 2 on chiropractic and 1 on facet joint interventions for pain management. Now, unless you are multi-specialty practice and you're doing facet joint interventions, then you would only need to pull the LCD 35424 and then the article 52987. Now, every contractor is going to have a different article and a different LCD. So again, you have to make sure that you're pulling the one for the correct payer. Once you click on, so I clicked on the LCD article, and so what it does is it redirects me to cms.gov, which tells me that if I wanted to, I could go to cms.gov to directly find the LCD for the chiropractic services, okay? And so the local coverage determination, and it tells us in this particular LCD that the codes are moving from LCDs to articles. So you can actually see that has happened, and it will direct you to the local coverage article. From there, you can print a PDF of that LCD, and it will give you the full document that you can use to help guide you towards medical necessity. So what does this LCD say? And fortunately for us, those of us who are in this jurisdiction and who use Novitas, it probably gives us the most comprehensive guideline for medical necessity for chiropractic of all the LCDs and the LCAs out there. And so while many of the Medicare administrative contractors won't tell us how many visits are there visit coverage limitations for, Novitas does. And I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read this, but I'm going to read it to you. It basically says that Medicare, and looking in this gray, in the purple box that has been highlighted, states that Medicare expects that acute symptom signs due to subluxation or acute exacerbation, reoccurrence of symptoms, signs due to subluxation might be treated vigorously. So first of all, what does that tell me? That tells me that Medicare covers acute conditions, exacerbations, and reoccurrences. And so sometimes what I'll hear a chiropractor say is, well, they don't cover exacerbations, or they don't cover chronic conditions or reoccurrences. And that's totally not true. They actually do cover that. And so what you need to do is you need to understand how you are supposed to document that in order to prove medical necessity. Now, this LCD states that Medicare will allow up to 12 chiropractic manipulations per month and 30 per beneficiary per calendar year. So that gives us another guideline. So that tells us that Medicare is going to, if you are treating a patient, whether you're treating a patient for multiple conditions, let's say a patient comes to you in the beginning of the year with subluxation and acute problems in the neck, and then later on in the year they hurt their low back. If you've treated them 30 visits for that neck problem, there's nothing left. So they're saying 30 visits in a year. They're not saying 30 visits per diagnosis. They're saying 30 visits per beneficiary per calendar year. And so you have to be aware of that, okay? The other thing it tells you, which is very interesting in this particular LCD, is that it gives you guidelines for diagnosis codes. And it tells us that based on the diagnosis code you use, you might be eligible to treat a patient for up to 12, 18, 24, or 30 visits. And they take the diagnosis codes that are in the LCA, because remember that the coding guidance is found in the article, not in the LCD. And so if you were to look up that local coverage article, you would find those diagnosis codes grouped into 4 different groups, A, B, C, and D. And depending on what group that diagnosis code is in, this would give you a clue as to how many visits that Medicare patient might have before Medicare begins to kick in either automated denials or automated pre-claims reviews or pre-claims audits, meaning prospective audits on those services. So if, for example, you're seeing a patient, they're tootling along. We had a client last month who received a denial from Medicare, and the patient is being treated for a condition that is in the Group D diagnoses, which is up to 30 chiropractic manipulation treatments. The problem is that this patient was treated 5 days, 1 week, and this was a new patient, and then 3 times a week for 3 more weeks. Well, that exceeded their 12 visits per calendar month. So anything after 12 visits per calendar month was denied as not medically necessary, because there are very specific guidelines that we would need to follow if we're filing claims through this particular Medicare administrative contractor. The other thing that we would want to be aware of is that the medical record has to support the medical necessity as stated in the policy manual. So there are additional manuals that you would want to look up for chiropractic services. And these LCDs and local coverage articles will guide you to those manuals so that you can get additional information on correct billing and coding for chiropractic services. Now, this is the local coverage article. So at the bottom of the LCD, there was a link to the local coverage article, and I was able to click on that. And again, if you just come over here to the far right, you can click on Need a PDF, and then you can print the entire transcript of that article. And so what this tells us is this gives us some billing guidance. So for example, it tells you to report the initial treatment date or date of exacerbation. And that's what has to go in box 14 of the CMS 1500 claim form. So if, for example, you're getting a lot of denials by Medicare or rejections on your claims for onset date, that's because you have not reported the initial treatment date or exacerbation as required by this billing guideline. The other talks about what modifiers need to be placed on these Medicare claims. And so it tells you that for acute treatment, the AT modifier should be on there. And for patients who may be on maintenance that you have had an ABN filled out on, you would, and the patient has chosen option 1 on the ABN, meaning that I want Medicare to continue to be billed, but we want to get a determination from Medicare as to whether they'll cover it or not. You would append the GA modifier on that claim to let Medicare know that you have an ABN on file. And if you don't put that GA modifier on there and Medicare denies the claim for medical necessity, what will happen is they will deny it as a CO, meaning contractual obligation, 50, not medically necessary denial, and that will be a write-off or an appeal on your part. And you would have to appeal it. And if you appeal it and you didn't get an ABN form, then you would have to write that off. But if you're telling Medicare in advance, look, we got an ABN for this, we know that this patient is maintenance, but we're telling you that we have an ABN, then you put that GA modifier on there, Medicare will deny it, but they will deny it as a PR denial, stating that the patient is responsible for that service because you got the ABN form. Okay, and so some of the other things that it tells you in the coding guidelines is that the mere presence of the AT modifier doesn't indicate that the services are medically necessary. Reasonable and necessary requirements as addressed by the LCD have to be met, okay? And it tells you also other services that would be excluded from Medicare payments, such as lab tests, x-rays, office visits, physical therapy, traction, and supplies. And so the local coverage article explains very clearly that these are not covered services by Medicare. Medicare LC articles also give you all of your documentation or your diagnosis coding guidance. And remember, everything that we're seeing here from this Medicare LCD or Medicare LCA is also included, you will find at the commercial payer sites, they will have similar articles that will give you this kind of information. So there's really no mystery to it. You just need to find the right articles. So what it tells us here for Medicare is that the patient has a primary diagnosis. And what is it? The only diagnosis codes that Medicare gives you as primary diagnosis for a Medicare patient for patients who are filing claims to Novitas are the M99.00 through M99.05. And so what this tells me is that if there is any other diagnosis code in the first position of that Medicare claim, it's going to be denied because this has to be the primary diagnosis. But the interesting thing about this particular LCD or LCA is that it gives you also the accompanying diagnosis codes or the supporting diagnosis codes that will allow you to have a better understanding of how many visits is that supporting diagnosis expected to provide medical necessity for. And so what you're looking at here on your screen, just taking an excerpt from the LCD, it states that Medicare does not expect that substantially more than the following number of treatments will usually be required. 12 manipulation treatments for group A, 18 for group B, 24 for group C, 30 for group D, okay? So what you're seeing here is a partial list of group A diagnosis codes, okay? And what Medicare does is they look at the primary diagnosis, and then they are going to look at your secondary diagnosis, and it's that secondary diagnosis that's going to kick this treatment parameter of 12, 18, 24, or 30 visits. So if your primary diagnosis is M99.01, which is a cervical subluxation, followed by M54.2, which is cervicalgia or neck pain, then you're giving them a group A diagnosis as the secondary diagnosis code to that primary diagnosis that's in the first position. And where I see that as a problem is that we have patients that their neck pain or the acute part, the neck, of pain is gone after 2, 3, 4 visits, but we don't remove that neck pain from the problem list and remove it from the claim. So now we're into visit 14, 15, 16, where we're continuing to treat that patient for a more degenerative condition that is found in group D or group C, which is going to allow for more visits, but we haven't removed that cervicalgia from the problem list or from the claim. And so Medicare is reading that, then the narrative that you're giving Medicare is that you're continuing to treat this cervical subluxation for neck pain. But then when you look at your note is showing after about the 5th or 6th visit that the patient's pain scale is down to a 3 or a 2, but you're still giving insurance companies, and this isn't just Medicare, you're doing this, the tendency is to forget to take these pain codes off the claim when pain is no longer present, and continue treating patients for more degenerative conditions. This Medicare LCD lays it out very clearly. Here's a partial list of Group B diagnoses, and these are more diffuse pain codes like myositis, myalgia, fibromyalgia, and ligament sprains. And so this is up to 18 visits. So this allows for additional beyond those 12 visits that would be medically necessary for treatment or resolution of pain. Then we have the partial list of Group C diagnosis codes, and these are some of your disc disorders, spinal stenosis, discitis, and other intervertebral disc disorders. And note that you have some very specific diagnosis codes here. So, for example, the cervical disc disorder with radiculopathy has a disorder based on the level of the C-spine, C4-5, C5-6, and C6-C7. And so you have to be as specific as you possibly can when you're dealing with these diagnosis codes. And then you have your Group D diagnoses, and these are the ones that bring the visit count up to 30 visits for Medicare. And these are your cervical disc degeneration codes and so on and so forth. Now, remember, if you're going to be diagnosing cervical disc degeneration, how are you going to prove medical necessity for that? Probably with an X-ray. So it would be very, very difficult for you to just note cervical disc degeneration without a visual X-ray or CT or MRI of that C-spine in order to prove that. And remember that that's not covered by Medicare. So the patient would have to be sent out, or you would have to have the patient pay cash for that cervical, for that particular diagnosis or that X-ray. Okay. So remember that it's that secondary diagnosis. And so what you would have is, let's say you have a patient that comes in and they have, acute neck pain, but they also through X-ray have disc degeneration. So what you would do is, let me just go back, you would basically code, for example, the M99.01, followed by the acute condition, which is cervicalgia. And then once the cervicalgia is resolved, then you would remove that and then bring the degenerative code up to that second position to allow Medicare to show that, and you show them that the accompanying visits are indeed medically necessary. So that is typically how you would do that. But what happens if you have a situation where the payer doesn't publish an LCD? Can you use another payer's LCD? So you see, Novitas has got a great LCD. Noridian doesn't have one. So I have doctors ask me all the time, can I use the Novitas LCD instead of mine, or because mine is so non-specific, or can I use the LCD, of another, if I don't have an LCD, can I use another payer's LCD? And what you would need to do is you would need to look for the national coverage guidelines and other associated articles first. And then second, look at retired LCDs from your payer. And your payer may have retired LCDs that you can pull from. It doesn't always help us. So you always want to go to the national documents when you have an absence of an LCD for your particular payer. How often should I pull a new LCD? That's another question that I get quite a bit. So when you pull an LCD, it will give you an original effective date, it will give you a revision effective date, and an ending date. And sometimes you will see an ending date and sometimes you won't. So First of all, you have to make sure that when you're looking at an LCD or an LCA or even a medical policy guideline from a commercial payer, you have to know what the effective date of it is, because you cannot use this LCD for dates of service to prove medical necessity or prove a claim for dates of service prior to November 7th of 2019. You would have to go and look for a retired LCD for let's say you're going to appeal a claim from September of last year. You have to go back to that LCD that applies to those dates of service. So be aware of that. Make sure you do that. DX codes are, LCDs are going to be published and republished throughout the year. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to them. I will say, though, that most of them, when you see the revisions, they're going to be revised in the fall after October 1st. And the reason for that is because October 1st is when the new DX codes for the next year come out. That's the fiscal year for the United States government. And so October 1st is when the ICD-10 code book is published, the new publication. So, for example, back in 2018, code M79.1, which is myalgia, was deleted as a billing code, and there were four more specific codes above beyond myalgia. So M79.1 could no longer be used for billing. So if you were arguing a claim prior to October 1st of 2018, that M79.1 is fine. But if you put M79.1 on a claim after October 1st, it would not be on that LC local coverage article because that code is not valid. So that's just something to be aware of. Changes to Medicare policy could also trigger the necessity for a new LCD to be published. And so that may be if there's a big change in the chiropractic benefit structure, there will certainly be new LCDs published for that. Or if there's a new policy, new law, or new policy that affects the LCDs, they will pull the old ones and publish new ones for an effective date of whenever that law is passed. But at the very least, go ahead and pull a new LCD annually. Pull it based on the revision ending date if you get one, or annually if not. And I would recommend maybe after the 1st of October, sometime around the 1st of November. So also, I want to make you aware of, if the LCDs that, let's say you're a Noridian doctor, you're billing to Noridian, and you don't have an LCD. Well, how do I find out more about medical necessity or about documentation requirements if my Medicare administrative contractor doesn't give me an LCD? Well, what you would do is you could go to cms.gov to the outreach and education section and go to something called MLN, or Medicare Learning Network, and there are a wealth of articles, of videos, and webinars that you can look at to learn more about billing under the concept of medical necessity. There's a wonderful job aid for doctors of chiropractic that give you the requirements, the bullet points of a valid and complete SOAP note for a Medicare chiropractic visit, okay? So you can come to the Medicare MLN educational tool, get a print-friendly version of this. It gives you everything, how to prove subluxation through either X-ray or part exam. It tells you what bullet points and what elements need to be included in the initial evaluation of that treatment, what the treatment plan should consist of, the fact that there needs to be a treatment plan, a written one that gives frequency and duration of visits, specific treatment goals, and objective measures to evaluate treatment effectiveness. It also gives you the bullet points of what the subsequent visits, your daily visits, need to have in the note. And remember, this guideline for Medicare documentation of chiropractic visits has been adopted by most commercial payers, with the exception of the part exam, which is a very specific Medicare exam to prove subluxation. But you know, and then you have your general guidelines, and these general guidelines are actually general documentation guidelines for all medical services, not just for chiropractic services. And so this tells us, if you were to be audited, these are some of the things that you would need to have in your notes to make sure that when you're audited, you're submitting a complete note to the payer. Also, the end of this job aid gives you all kinds of other references that you can actually click on, and it will take you directly to those references: the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual, the Claims Processing Manual, a special edition article on Medicare coverage for chiropractic services, medical record documentation requirements, and then educational resources to assist chiropractors with medical billing. So Medicare does not leave anything to guesswork. I mean, everything you need to understand medical necessity from Medicare standpoint is there at your fingertips, okay? Now, you also have payer guidelines, and these are the same concept as an LCD, except these are published by your commercial payers like Anthem, United Healthcare, Cigna, Humana, and so on. Some of them are just like with Medicare. Some of them are more comprehensive than others. Some are very ambiguous and don't give you a lot, but some of them give you a rich wealth of knowledge to help you define medical necessity from the payer's standpoint. And so this is just a screenshot of what you would do. So in order to pull medical policy from a commercial payer, you would go to that payer's website and look for the provider section. From there, this is actually Anthem of Virginia that I was in. I was looking up the medical policy for a client in Virginia. And so it asked me what state I was looking for, because Anthem operates in many different states throughout the United States. And so I clicked on Virginia. And then what it did was it gave me some choices: clinical practice guidelines, and then other services. They actually had one for chiropractic care. So Anthem of Virginia directed me to a link for a guideline for chiropractic care. Now, sometimes when you do that, it actually redirects you. So notice this is the four-letter word of chiropractors, ASH, or American Specialty Health. I know we hate it. We hate having to deal with ASH. There are a lot of chiropractic contracts that are managed by ASH, and Anthem is one of them. So if you have an Anthem patient, what that tells me is that ASH is the entity that publishes the chiropractic guidelines for Anthem patients. And I have gone through the Anthem website, and I've clicked on every single state, and every single time it takes me to ASH. And so then what I have to do is I have to follow, if I'm going to follow the medical policy guidelines for my Anthem patient, I have to follow the guidelines for ASH. Even if I don't bill, the medical policy guidelines and the medical necessity guidelines are going to be found in ASH, and then I would click on chiropractic, and then what it would do is it would take me to all the resources that AshLink has for guidelines. It will give me clinical practice guidelines, state-specific policy guidelines, frequently used, and Cigna ASH medical coverage guidelines. So if you bill Cigna and ASH is the third-party intermediary that manages the Cigna contract, then you would look for the medical policies for that. And you can click on these links to find the correct medical policies that you're looking for. eviCore is another third-party intermediary that handles many of the Blue Cross policy guidelines for many of the different states. And so this is one that I found when I was looking for a medical policy for a chiropractic policy for an Arizona client. And when I went to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, I clicked on providers, I clicked on medical policy guidelines, and it redirected me to eviCore Healthcare. And eviCore publishes medical policy guidelines, you can see by this screen, for a number of different medical specialties, including cardiology, gastro, medical oncology, radiation oncology, post-acute care, but also musculoskeletal advanced procedures and musculoskeletal therapies, which includes chiropractic, acupuncture, and massage. And if you look at the EviCore guidelines, you can search by health plan. If you don't know the health plan, you can view all of the guidelines they have and then narrow it down. So if I look at chiropractic, it gives me an effective date of February 15th. So this is probably one that I would want to go back now that it's March 1st and see if they've published a new guideline, because now this is a year old. You know, I'm probably going to look and see if anything new has been published on this. And so this is the clinical guidelines for chiropractic services as published by EviCore. Now I wanted to show you guys something. I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but this is 562 pages long. All right. And so this is a very, very comprehensive clinical policy guideline that can help you with establish medical necessity for a number of different conditions that you might be treating. So you'll notice the reason why this is such an exhaustive and extensive guideline is that it gives you guidelines not only for chiropractic services, but for every diagnosis code a chiropractor, or the top diagnosis codes that are utilized by chiropractors. So if you have a patient that has torticollis, for example, you can go to the EviCore guideline and it will give you your medical necessity guidelines, your utilization parameters, your documentation guidelines. Everything that you need will be found in these medical policy guidelines. So we're looking, what I'm looking at is, if I go back, I'm looking at the policy for cervicalgia. Okay, so what does the payer say about documenting medical necessity for chiropractic visits? Okay, and it tells me, you know, significant functional limitation. Practitioners are strongly encouraged to utilize validated, standardized assessment tools to quantify limitations, for example, neck disability index, oswestry, pain limiting function in at least 3 to 10. So you can see, you can take these guidelines and you can compare them against the notes that you're doing and the notes that you may be providing an insurance company, and realize that, you know, maybe my notes need to be brought up to a better standard in order for me to justify medical necessity. It also talks about, and this is just chiropractic management for cervicalgia, it tells you things like home programs should be initiated with the first therapy session. What does that tell me? That tells me that it's important to initiate some type of a home rehab protocol for these patients, that I'm to manage the condition for 2 weeks, and then possibly do a reevaluation after 2 weeks. If the patient no longer has neck pain, then that should come off of the problem list and off of the claim. So these are just some of the highlights that I wanted you to see with respect to the policy guideline. It also tells you within each week of care, from week 0 to week 8, what kind of an improvement is expected. And if the patient isn't meeting that expectation of improvement, when do you discharge the patient or refer them out? Okay. It also talks about what to do with a non-compliant patient. So these are like little Bibles for you to help you understand how medical necessity works. It also talks about self-management techniques and other alternative treatments that would complement chiropractic treatment. And so it's telling us that these complementary therapies are available for a patient to have, and that they would be payable per the EviCore guidelines. Okay. And then it tells you which carriers follow these EviCore guidelines. So if this is just the letter A, is Aetna of Arizona, Aetna Better Health, Alliance, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona, Cigna follows, all Cigna follows EviCore. So if you have a Cigna patient, it's going to follow these EviCore guidelines for medical necessity. Some other examples of medical policies, here's where you would go to find the Aetna policies. Go to providers and then click on medical policies. And then it talks about how to utilize and find the clinical policy bulletins. And then here are the provider manuals. This is for eMed New York. This is New York Medicaid. It gives you provider manuals for billing. And so you will find those if you do billing to Medicaid. They have their own guidelines as well. So the bottom line of all of this is that there really should be no mysteries when it comes to understanding medical necessity and documentation requirements for the various specialties that you do business with. And payers, by and large, do a very good job at defining medical necessity for you and the documentation guidelines that you're supposed to be following. And remember, it's not one size fits all. You can't say, or I'm going to take the Novitas guideline and I'm going to apply that to all of my payers, and I'm going to argue my claims or appeal my claims based on the Medicare guideline. Because if the payer has their own guideline, you have to use that one in order to color. So I say color between the lines. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have. I don't know if there's, this is a new feature for me. So, okay, we have a few questions. Paul Aaron, the current deductible for Medicare Part B is $198, then a 20% coinsurance. Okay, awesome. I appreciate that, Dr. Aaron. We can definitely, so the current copay for Medicare, it's not a copay, it is a coinsurance. Unless you're dealing with a Medicare Advantage plan, then there's a copay. So essentially, for chiropractic manipulations, it is a $198 deductible, 80/20 of the Medicare allowables for the spinal manipulations. Everything else is non-covered and is a 100% covered by the patient. It's patient responsibility. And if you have any questions, additional questions after this conference, and you would like to talk to me about it or talk to one of my consultants about it, we are more than happy to talk to you. Give us a call. You can email me, info@goldstarmedical.net, or visit our website. We have an online tool that you can submit questions to. And I want to just thank you for a great session today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh,
we're done.
Yay. Well, thank y'all so much, everybody. A couple of people were asking for the handouts. And you can download those under files. Also, for those of you who always want to email me and say, hey, can you get a certificate of attendance? That is also now available under files. So you can print that off and put that in your training binder. Megan, thank you so much. So
yeah, Megan, thank you.
She said she highly recommends any additional training with Lisa that your office may need. Just got back from a billing class with her in Tampa, and her knowledge is amazing. So that was really great. So see y'all, I tell you all the time, I'm always looking for recommendations for speakers and topics. So submit them. We now have, you'll notice on the webinar page on the website, there is a place for potential speakers to submit their application to be a presenter on the webinar series. We do have like a 15-month waiting list. But I get emails every single day with people wanting to tell me about a class that they would like to present or to recommend somebody. So just have them go and submit the presenter application and review all that information and reach out to people as we're scheduling, because we're working on Q3 and Q4 right now. So just want to thank everybody for attending. The webinar recording will be available in about 30 to 45 minutes. You can go back and listen to it, share it with someone on your team who thinks could benefit from this, and I can think of plenty of people on the team that could benefit from this. Next week we have Dr. Penny Bell. He's going to be talking about pediatric chiropractic. I am so excited about
That's
this
very exciting.
presentation.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why next week on my birthday. So I expect all of you to attend. Because it's Webinar Tuesday and I'm working on my birthday. We didn't skip it, nothing. I'm going to be here just for y'all. So make sure you're here. The next week we're going to be talking about HIPAA. And I promise it's going to be a really fun class with Matt DeBlasi. And just so y'all know, I do know how to say Lisa's last name. I have a way that I say it.
You didn't, though.
I didn't, because I have to remember I say it one way, so I remember how to spell it.
That's
which
right.
is not the way you say it.
No,
But
not at all. Not even close.
Thank you, Ryan. I just sent IT a message that said, please find me a new mod. I'm like been all over Webinar Game about all my technical issues. It's not them, it's my stuff. But yeah, see, I always think of it as Lisa Majestic. It's Lisa Majeski. But how I say it, so I spell it right, is
Maciejewski, that's
right.
correct.
So I don't want to say it wrong because I have to think about it. Thank y'all so much for the awesome feedback, which means y'all know that Lisa will be back very soon. The majestic Lisa Majeski will be back in a couple of months.
Okay, Paul, call me and I will get you the fee schedule. So it's based on the fee schedule. So if you want to give me a call, I can give you those numbers, okay?
Yes, and her are super helpful. Like, I love them. Love them, love them, love them, love them, love them. So they're fantastic. So anyway, if you have a chance to hear Lisa live and in person, please make sure you attend her class. If she is not speaking at one of your state association events, then call them and say, we want Lisa.
And by the way, guys, this next week, if you're in Arkansas, I'm going to be in Arkansas at the Arkansas Chiropractic Association this weekend, teaching 8 hours on Friday. So, I know sometimes doctors don't like to go to those association meetings, but we're going to be presenting some really excellent material. So if you're an Arkansas doctor, you may want to hop in on Friday and visit with me.
You absolutely should. Y'all have an amazing rest of your day and a fabulous week.
Take care. Bye, everyone.